Hello, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear audience. A very warm welcome to this first EPRS event in 2025. It's, as you know, on the 10 issues to watch. And I think it's early enough in the year to still wish you all a very happy and successful 2025. My name is Jutta Schulze-Holmen. I'm director in the European Parliamentary Research Service. And of course, I'm delighted to open this year of research events and many, many useful insights, hopefully. I'm also pleased to announce that Vice President Victor NEGRESCU will join us probably around 14:30, I'm informed, and he's available as well for the concluding remarks. I hear also that other members are in the audience. I was assured that Maria Grappini will be there, so a very warm welcome to her as well. I can't spot you right now. This is the 9th edition of our flagship publication on 10 issues to watch, and it's a special one. And yes, we say this every year, but this year it's true. Because it's a new political cycle, which started, as you all know, with the von der Leyen II Commission. It's a new cycle that started on the 1st of December, and of course a lot of critical policy choices will have to be made. And in line with our mandate of empowering through knowledge, we wish to contribute to make those decisions, those choices, informed ones. Now, I know in times of growing uncertainty, of growing volatility, that we all look for little clues on which to base some optimism. And when I ran first through the titles of our 10 contributions, I discovered a lot the words strengthening, gearing up, restoring. So these are all very positive verbs, and especially they indicate that the European acquis is already in place, that policies are in place and measures, and that actually it's just for us to find that next gear, and that actually we're moving in the right direction and progress is near. So on that positive note, I would like to invite you all to dive into the 10 selected issues to watch. And I'm happy to announce that our moderator today is Lasse Böhm, the head of the Economic Policies Unit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jutta, and a warm welcome also from my side. I will briefly explain how the event will be structured before we really kick off with the debate. Just let me let you into a little secret, since we're here in this cozy atmosphere of the European Parliament library. Jutta spoke about uncertainty. Crystal balls in politics don't exist, and not even EPRS has a crystal ball. But, and that's the important bit, what are the 10 issues to watch? So they are not, if you like to use the analogy, they're not an hourly weather forecast. They don't tell you precisely when the sun will shine or the rain will fall. They're more like a long-term weather forecast. So this is about underlying trends, long-term things that might happen, and specific policy decisions, policy dates that you might want to watch out for. So I think it's a really useful publication, which I really do encourage you to read. And we have the authors here who will briefly present their topics. Now, there are, of course, more than 10 issues to watch, or more than 10 issues which are important this year, and in fact in any given year. So inevitably, 10 issues means we had to make a selection. We looked at what European citizens found important last year. For example, we looked at the Eurobarometer survey, which most of you will be familiar with. And which said that European citizens really want to see action in the areas of economic policy, climate, security and defense, and migration. But in our selection, we also concentrated specifically on the things that the EU can actually do, and more specifically, still what the European Parliament can do. And out came this publication, which you can take with you at the end. I'm delighted that I've got all the authors, all the 10 authors of the 10 chapters here on the stage behind me, who will each briefly present their topic. We will start with economic policy, followed by climate, security and defense, Then we will zoom in into more sectoral policies, if you like, artificial intelligence, the future of the European car industry, and migration. And we will end on 3 more horizontal items: the EU budget, particularly important this year, investment policy, and the issue of trust, which is, of course, key in the era of populism. So, if you like, it's a little bit of intellectual speed dating, because the interventions will be very short. Dating only works if it goes both ways, otherwise it might be too overbearing and overpowering. So I do encourage you to ask questions at the end. We will have a Q&A session. And also would like to encourage the online audience to put any questions you might have into the chat. Now, the first speaker will be Martin Höffelmeier, who sits here and who will take the stage shortly. Martin will speak about a particular dilemma in EU economic policy and in the EU's quest to improve its competitiveness. Namely, whether the EU in its economic policy should create a small number of very large companies, or foster a small number of very large companies able to compete globally, or whether it's better for the EU to have a large number of very small companies which compete within the internal market and which really drive innovation. That's a central dilemma that EU economic policy will have to solve and address this year. And I give the floor to Martin.
Thank you very much. Indeed, that's in a nutshell the gist of my topic. It's important economic policy questions that will be on top of many people's minds, and in particular economic policymakers' minds such as yours. And to help you understand this conundrum, I would like you to think about an orchestra. Many of you might have started this year by listening to the New Year's concert of the Vienna Philharmonics, arguably the most famous concert in the world, famous because of its orchestra, but also because of its unique sound. And just like an orchestra needs a well-balanced and well-tempered sound, the European Union needs a well-balanced and well-tempered economic policy mix in order to regain its competitive edge. Today and in the year ahead, I would like you to consider one specific aspect of the EU economic policy mix: the trade-off between scale, having large companies, and innovation, having many innovative companies. On the one hand, we want European companies to scale up, to compete on a global stage, and to be more productive. Large companies are, on average, more productive. On the other hand, we want European companies to compete in the single market, to drive innovation and to create a dynamic, competitive and innovative business environment. But here comes the trade-off. Focusing on scale alone, on creating large companies, might come at the expense of innovation, while prioritizing innovation might require, to some extent, limiting scale, or rather market concentration. To understand this is crucial to formulate and design a policy mix that is coherent and effective. Why is this important, and why is this important now? It is important because scaling up indeed does allow companies to be more productive, but it also allows them to invest, to develop key technologies. Evidence suggests that technological adoption rises with firms' size. But simply increasing a firm's size does not guarantee innovation. Companies that grow and dominate their markets often shift their focus from innovation to protecting their market position, an issue often raised in the context of promoting so-called European champions. Why is this important now? The European Union has embarked on this quest to increase its competitiveness and productivity. At the end of this month, the European Commission will present its competitiveness compass. And in this context, it's crucial not to lose sight of those trade-offs. To answer Lasse's questions, it is a balancing act. Innovation thrives at a balanced level of competition, where there are large companies that have the scale and the capacity to invest in cutting-edge technologies, but without too much market power to stifle innovation and to create market entry barriers. Just like with the best orchestras in the world that mix music together from very large instruments like percussion and timpanis, together with many small instruments like the violin, to create a truly world-class musical performance. Thank you.
In the age of the green transition, of course, we can't think of and speak about economic policy without also considering the climate and climate policy. And of course, this year, 2025, the European Commission will finally present its much-awaited 2040 climate target, very contested. I have Liselotte Jensen to my right, who will explain why this is important and why it's going to be quite difficult.
Thank you, Lasse. Good afternoon. 2025. We are now in the middle of what have been dubbed the critical decade for climate action. This is the decade in which the world needs to reverse the trend of ever-rising global emissions. The warmer our planet becomes, the worse the climate crisis will get. Remember July heat waves in the Mediterranean, September flooding in Central Europe, September wildfires in Portugal, October floods in Spain, and now Los Angeles burns. For this crisis, though, we know what we need to do. 4 years ago, this House, together with member states, agreed on the European climate law. This law legally binds the EU to deliver climate neutrality by 2050. This is not an easy task, but it is necessary. To visualize the task at hand, allow me to illustrate. This is 2050. Climate neutrality. All remaining emissions must be covered by removals. Now let's go back in time. Here is 1990. 35 years ago, the European Council adopted the first EU climate targets. Since then, EU climate targets evolved. 8% in 2010, 20% by 2020. Already in 2009, following increased scientific evidence, EU leaders committed to a long-term emission reduction of 80 to 95% by 2050. At the beginning of the last mandate, in 2021, this House agreed with EU member states on a legally binding target of net 55% reductions by 2030. We know decarbonization is not easy, but it is necessary. In recent years, impacts from global and geopolitical events, such as the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have put unforeseen pressures on European industry and sectors. Changed circumstances, in combination with recently adopted green legislation, is putting unintended pressures on some sectors. Now, today, at just under 40% reductions achieved, some are questioning the green transition policies. It is starting to be hard. So, 2025. In 2025, European policymakers will need to adopt policies which boost European competitiveness to protect European jobs and industries and the overall economy. Recent reports on how to do this have pointed to innovation and decarbonization. Competing through excellence in clean tech and lowering energy costs through domestic energy autonomy are some key steps. The announced competitiveness compass focuses on these aspects. This is also not easy, but it is necessary. The Commission has announced that it will propose in early 2025 a binding target to reduce EU net emissions by at least 90% by 2040. The hardest part is still ahead of us. My contribution focuses on EU carbon management from 2030 to 2050 and the links between industrial competitiveness and climate policy. 2025 is indeed a year of critical policy choices. Our path to 2040 will determine our likelihood of achieving 2050 climate neutrality. Thank you.
So we heard of two important things to watch this year already, economic policy and climate policy. And the two are very much intertwined, as the two previous speakers said. But arguably, there's also a third dimension, of course, security. I've got Martin Szypanski here on the podium. Very glad and welcome to you, Martin. He will speak about the EU's economic security agenda. Martin.
Thank you, Lasse. One of the first big news of 2025 was soon-to-be President of the United States threatening Denmark with high tariffs to acquire Greenland. It was shocking news. It felt like something new. Excuse me. But in fact, the practice of using economy as a tool to achieve geopolitical goals has been used throughout human history. First examples come from ancient Greece. What does this tell us? Let me say it clearly. There is no security without economic security. The European Union has always championed free trade and global economic links. However, the rise of China, first Trump presidency, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, made us see new types of risks. Supply chains exposed to political decisions and sudden shortages, unfair subsidies used to expand business on the single market, return of tariffs, an instrument many thought belonged to economic history books. Think about it. These were used by our main trade partners, the US and China. I am not even mentioning Russia. More is to come in 2025 and beyond. Watch next Monday across the Atlantic. So what can we do about it? We already have a solid base, the first ever EU economic security strategy. It is based on three priorities, three P's, so to say. First, promote EU competitiveness. Without such sound economic base, we will not be secure. Second, protect from those risks I mentioned. Use the instruments we already have and develop new ones if necessary. Third, partner with countries that share the same values and concerns. Support global trade. As you can see, economic security policy is really three policies. It is complex because it addresses complex issues. So in 2025, more than anything, it needs coherence, it needs balancing, it needs a clear vision. To paraphrase words from Hamlet, it needs a method not to become madness. Let me explain this in a way that has probably never been heard in this library room before. Three P's: protect, promote, partner, like three sides of this triangle. But one sound only. Like one economic security, because there is no security without economic security. Thank you.
And I should probably add, there is no security without a defense policy. That's something that the EU and Europe had to learn the hard way in the Russian-Ukraine war. I'm very glad to have on stage Sebastian Klapp, policy analyst for defense. Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Lasse. So the first ever European Commissioner for Defence and Space took up office in December of 2024. It is a position that the European Parliament has been calling for a very long time. And one of his main priorities is the topic that I will be discussing today, strengthening the European defence industry. The Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine has dramatically changed the European security landscape, but it has also revealed the limitations of the European defence industry in meeting heightened demand for defence equipment. It has also served as a wake-up call when it comes to boosting defence budgets and the European defence industry. The EU-based defence industry is certainly competitive at a global level, but it has been unable to reach its full potential, mainly due to four issues. Firstly, chronic underinvestment. Secondly, fragmentation from the supply and the demand side. thirdly, dependency on third countries, and fourthly, limited defense production capacity. However, there is hope, and a lot is already being done. In the Strategic Compass and the Versailles Declaration, EU heads of state and government committed to boost their defense budgets, but also to strengthen the European defense industry. The combined defense budgets of the EU member states have increased by 50% since 2021 to reach an unprecedented 326 billion euros in 2024. The EU has passed legislation to boost defense production capacity, to incentivize joint procurement, but also to promote joint defense research and capability development. Very importantly, in March of last year, the first ever European Defence Industrial Strategy was put forward by the Commission, along with a proposal for a European Defence Industry Programme regulation as a first means to deliver the strategy. Looking ahead, strengthening European defence is one of the main priorities of the new Commission. The new Commissioner for Defence and Space, Andrius Kubilius, and the new High Representative, Kaja Kallas, will lead the efforts when it comes to strengthening the European defence industry. Among other things, they will publish a white paper on the future of European defence within the first 100 days of the new Commission. Yet in order to implement the ambitious goals of the new Commission, it will face financial, political and external challenges. Financially, the Commission estimates that over the next decade, an additional 500 billion euros in defence investment will be needed. Politically, member states will have to overcome a history of fragmented approaches in defence and resistance to more defence cooperation. And external factors, of course, include shifts in US foreign policy, for instance. In closing, let me just underline that this is not just about defence. This is about ensuring that Europe is prepared to safeguard its values, its security and its sovereignty. Thank you so much.
So we heard from the two previous speakers who had a rather sort of external policy focus, and we will now slightly shift the focus more towards an internal EU domestic, if you like, policy agenda, namely artificial intelligence. Maria Niestad will explain why the EU is lagging behind in the development of artificial intelligence and what can be done. Maria.
Thank you. Last year, the EU adopted the Artificial Intelligence Act, the world's first horizontal legislation in this field. But how is the EU doing in this field at the beginning of this year? Well, in regulating AI, we are a frontrunner. When it comes to AI development, uptake and financing, then we are not doing so great. Take the last decade. For instance, private investments into generative AI in the United States was roughly 20 billion. Do you know how much in the EU? Less than $1 billion. Let me give you an example of an AI company founded in the EU. I will not give the name of this company, but it is a true story. Actually, I used AI to find this example. The story starts in Romania. Picture a young man, Daniel, who had an idea of using software robots to help businesses to automate repetitive tasks. In 2005, he founded, together with another guy, his company with big dreams. But they struggled to find customers, partners, and funding in Europe. Now this company is headquartered in New York and is a global leader in its field. So what changed? Namely, it moved to the United States, where they found better access to private investments, partners with the global companies, and more customers. Sadly, this is not an isolated case. Many EU companies find greater success after focusing on markets outside of Europe. So how can the EU better support AI companies? First, it should scale up investments, not only public investments, but also private investments. Second, it should turn more EU-funded research projects into marketable products and services. And third, we should not forget AI skills. We should also retain more AI talent within the region. So here is something to watch in 2025. Will this trend of EU companies finding better opportunities abroad be reversed? But what are EU institutions doing to reverse this trend? The European Commission has announced several actions for 2025, such as AI factories that give companies and researchers access to EU supercomputers, Apply AI Strategy, Cloud and AI Development Act, and the General Purpose AI Code of Practice. In short, it is taking some measures, but nothing revolutionary. As I wrote in the publication, the road to becoming an AI continent is still long. So let's see if in 2025, the EU will start supporting more AI companies, in particular when it comes to financing. Thank you.
Let's stick with the future for the time being, and this image of the road. We will move to the future of the EU car industry, because this year, 2025, of course, means that we only have 10 years to meet our own EU internal deadline of phasing out petrol and diesel cars. The deadline is 2035. Matthias Güllentops here will explain why this is very difficult for the EU car industry and where the EU car industry is and how it can meet the challenge. Matthias.
Thank you. So on the topic of electric cars, what legislation should we watch? We start the year with a 15% emissions reduction that applies to the sale of new cars and vans. And car makers that fail to meet these targets can face millions of euros in fines. In practice, it means they need to sell more electric cars. By the end of this year, we will see a review of this legislation, and some member states have already asked for an earlier review. Secondly, 2025 marks the beginning of a gradual implementation of road transport into the emissions trading system. And third, by the end of this year, we should see the installation of recharging pools every 60 kilometers on the core network. The Commission is following all these developments and has promised to launch this month a strategic dialogue on the future of the car industry. So what is the situation in the car industry in Europe? In October's plenary, former Commissioner announced or acknowledged that the European car industry is facing a crisis, and we see at least 3 challenges to make the green transition. First, last year we witnessed that the average price of a battery electric vehicle has gone up. Secondly, we witnessed that the number of sales of battery electric vehicles has gone down. And third, recharging isn't always accessible. So how could we get out of this crisis? I will present 3 aspects that I think should be addressed. First of all is the issue of affordability. Electric cars are expensive, and competition from China forces us to review our business model. China succeeded in designing electric cars at affordable prices, while the European industry has focused more on luxury models. The production of a car in Europe is about 1/3 higher than in China. So in order to produce affordable cars, we should lower production costs. And we can find recommendations for this in the Draghi report. There you will find recommendations to lower labor costs, lower energy costs, increase automation, and so on. The second aspect I want to highlight is that of recharging infrastructure that is very uneven across Europe. Indeed, about half the recharging points in Europe are situated in only 2 member states, in the Netherlands and in Germany. The way forward is to implement the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, or AFIR. But that might not be enough, because AFIR only sets minimum standards, and we know that the rollout of infrastructure happens at a slower rate than electric vehicles. And the third aspect I would like to highlight is technological evolution. Some members in this House say that environmental policy is costly, it's expensive, the market is not ready, and we shouldn't rush the green transition. That said, we see continuous improvements in battery technology. We see higher energy density, lower weight, lower reliance on critical raw materials. But all these improvements, even though significant, are yet to be produced at scale. So which of these or other measures will carry more weight? That is something to watch. Will the Commission adapt its legislation, and if so, how? Will funding be increased? Will this help the industry? And will Member States speed up the installation of recharging infrastructure? All those things will be in motion this year. Thank you.
So Matthias just took as a starting point 10 years ahead. The starting point of the next speakers will be 10 years ago. Most people in the room might still remember the migration crisis 2015. So we move to the topic of migration. I'm very glad to have Kostika Dumbrava here, who will speak about where we are in terms of migration policy and in particular about returns. Kostika.
Thank you, Lasse. As you probably know, we're in the middle of a complex migration reform nowadays. The issue of returns, that was mentioned, is one of the remaining aspects that needs to be tackled properly. So what is the problem? Most migrants, according to the data, actually arrive and stay in the EU lawfully. There are some, however, who either cross the borders without permission, overstay their visas, or have their application for international protection rejected. According to the law, these people should leave the EU. However, this is not always the case. If we look at the data, it's only about 1 in 4 people who are ordered to return or actually leave the EU. Why such a gap? We can distinguish between 2 dimensions of this problem. The first dimension is about EU rules and procedures. We have a directive on returns, which is almost 2 decades old now and has a couple of important gaps and ambiguities. This creates implementation problems for the member states and also contributes to quite a diverse policy on returns across the EU. The second dimension is about the fact that many third countries actually are reluctant to cooperate with the EU on returns. This is despite EU's efforts to conclude readmission agreements and all the other types of arrangements to increase this cooperation. So what can we expect in 2025? First of all, the Commission has committed, once again, to put forward a new proposal on return. This should simplify the process and also increase coherence with regard to member state policies on return. Now, it's important to note that there is an increased pressure on the Commission to come out with innovative solutions on return, and one controversial issue is about establishing return hubs outside the EU. Secondly, the Commission and the Member States are now ongoing in the process of implementing the Migration Pact, which is due next year, and this also contains a couple of important elements on return. And finally, on the external dimension, we can expect that the Commission will push towards more strategic partnerships with countries of origin or transit. And this is part of a broader and more pragmatic approach to use all available EU leverages, such as diplomacy, development, visas, trade, in order to secure migration objectives. It remains to be seen whether this approach works and whether the EU actually would live up to its standards, commitments, and values when implementing these policies. You can read a bit more about this in my written contribution. Thank you so much.
We will now change the focus slightly. We heard about policies as diverse as the economy, climate, security, defense, the currency, AI, migration. What they have in common for all their diversity is that you need a lot of money to implement them. This is why I'm very glad to have Mariana Pari here on stage. 2025, of course, is the year that the European Commission will present its proposal for the next EU's multi-annual budget, the so-called MFF. Mariana will explain.
Indeed, thank you, Lasse. And already many questions arise. Let me share some with you. First question, which priorities should the EU finance? Today, you heard about defense, climate change, the need to top up investments and to continue with green and digital transition. All these are very crucial issues for the Union. So, do we want to back them? If so, we need more financing. We come to my second question. How big, then, should the EU budget be? Some estimations of the financing needs are 800 billion for investments per year, public and private, 50 billion for defense, and all this on top of the next generation EU that we have to repay with 30 billion. Overall, some experts suggest doubling the current budget, others even 4 times the current budget. Then, third question, where can we find the necessary financing? The Commission has proposed, at the request of the Parliament, new own resources for the Union. The Parliament has already approved these proposals. However, the Council has not moved at all. And this is a missed opportunity, because if we want to do more, then we need more budget resources, or we will have to cut in the existing programs. The Parliament can influence and contribute to the budget discussions by taking early a strong position. For example, the Parliament has already defended full budgetary scrutiny and also application of the rule of law. I come to my last question. What is our vision for the Union and for our budget? Do we want a weak budget struggling to cope with challenges, or a strong budget able to rise up to the Union's ambitions? I will not give you any answer. The answer is actually in your hands. You all have a possibility to influence the debate and the role to play, be it experts, analysts, journalists, and legislators. So think around these questions and be ready. The debate is to start in the next few weeks. Thank you.
There is, of course, one debate which cannot be separated from the budget, and that's the question of investment. How can the EU make the most of the resources it has? My colleague Alessandro D'Alfonso has a few ideas.
Thank you, Lasse. Have you ever tried to assemble a piece of furniture? I see some of you are nodding. We all know the feeling of disappointment when an essential element is missing or instructions are unclear. Even if we succeed at the end, we feel that it would have been much better if everything had been there from the start. The same goes with investment. Mariana has just talked about the financial resources that the European Union needs to invest in many strategic sectors, from the green transition to research and innovation and defense. The toolkit accompanying those resources will be equally crucial if we are to make the most of these resources. But what is a toolkit for investment? We can identify three key elements in such a toolkit. First, effective rules in the sector, the design of the piece of furniture. Second, clear rules for using the resources, the instruction manual. And third, a well-equipped administration at all levels involved, the tools. In recent years, the European Union has stepped up its efforts to reinforce the toolkit for investment. For example, the recovery and resilience plans financed by Next Generation EU couple investment and reform measures that mutually reinforce each other in many strategic sectors. In some cases, the measure has a specific objective of improving the way administrations manage public resources. In addition, the Commission is helping Member States, upon request, to design and implement reform measures through the technical support instrument. But you may wonder, why is all this important in 2025? Implementation of the recovery plans is advancing, and a mid-term evaluation highlighted support for reform measures and their links with investment as one of the key positive features of the plans. However, some delays have emerged, and the final deadline for implementation, August 2026, is approaching fast. Many experts, including at the European Central Bank last week, identified a still limited administrative capacity to invest as a major driver of those delays. Their recommendation is to strengthen further, the word strengthening is coming back, strengthen further the toolkit for investment in order to use the resources available for the recovery plans fully and well. At the same time, insights from the plans and from the technical support instrument will feed into the debate on how best to design the toolkit for future investment. Thank you.
There is one currency that is more sought after globally than the euro or the US dollar for that matter, and is not Bitcoin. I'm talking about trust. Trust is the essential currency in our democratic political systems. Naya Benson will speak about how lower levels of trust in our information sphere affect democracy as a system and what we can expect this year. Naya.
Thank you. Indeed, there are different currencies at play here and different types of power. We are seeing that trust in governments, trust in democracies, trust in media, in tech companies, in social media is being eroded across the world. Our information ecosystem is at the core of the trust issues that we are going through. If we don't trust the information we receive, we cannot make informed decisions, we cannot find solutions to the problems we are facing, including the issues that my colleagues have focused on. And if we don't find solutions, we lose trust. Our information ecosystem is our collective cognitive infrastructure. Trust is a critical raw material for our cognitive infrastructure, but it's becoming more and more scarce. As opposed to rare minerals, you cannot force the extraction of trust by invading or buying territory and mining it. On the contrary, coercion, bullying, or other dirty tricks do the exact opposite. The second you weaponize trust, it's gone. 85% of people in the world worry about disinformation, and with eroding trust in the information sphere, the pressure on governments to fix it is growing. In 2025, the world will be watching how Brussels will enforce its rights-driven digital regulation, including the Digital Services Act, the DSA, that especially affects very large online platforms and search engines, some of which are US companies. The new Commission will soon decide on a potential fine for X over alleged breaches of the DSA, which is set to be a key part of the announced European Democracy Shield. And next week, the Commission, German regulators, and X will meet to discuss risks related to the German election in February. On the other side of the Atlantic, as Martin mentioned, Donald Trump will be inaugurated in 4 days. US tech corporations and investors will be in the front row, and some will have direct influence on, even in, the White House. They need the executive to help them avoid foreign regulation. The incoming US Vice President has warned that the US could discontinue support for NATO if the EU tries to further regulate X. Mark Zuckerberg has leaned into this political climate and said he would end Meta's third-party fact-checking programs starting in the US, which raises questions about the future of Meta's fact-checking programs in Europe. He also accused the EU of censorship and urged the US government to defend the US tech industry abroad. There is a lot of industry to defend, and there is a lot of trust to jeopardize. Let's look at some of the hard components of the information architecture. SpaceX leads the global satellite internet market with over 6,000 Starlink satellites, more than 10 times as many as Europe's Eutelsat. Satellite broadband is set to be rolled out in 2025 in Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan, and India. At the same time, the US government and Ukraine depend on Starlink for military operations. But Russian troops invading Ukraine have also found ways to use Starlink terminals. These are just a few examples of corporate actors eclipsing the executive in the information sphere. This can affect trust in the executive, trust in transatlantic ties, and ultimately trust in democracy as a system, and guess who that would benefit. Speaking of democracy, let's look at the European Parliament. The day after Trump's inauguration, next Tuesday, the Council and the Commission will make statements in the Parliament on the need to enforce the Digital Services Act to protect democracy on social media, including against foreign interference and biased algorithms. Also next week, the composition of the new special committee on the European Democracy Shield will likely be announced. They will, among other things, be looking at the effects of very large online platforms on democracy in the EU. And that question is at the heart of the tension between the Brussels effect and the billionaires effect, and at the intersection between executive diplomacy, corporate diplomacy, and parliamentary diplomacy. Trust is also a critical raw material in diplomacy. The good news is that ties between the European Parliament and the US Congress have remained strong even when transatlantic ties on the executive level have been strained. So the transatlantic legislators' dialogue is more important than ever. And precisely because MEPs represent European voters, they are the most trustworthy diplomats of the planned European Democracy Shield. Thank you.
You heard the 10 authors of the publication, 10 issues to watch. Now is your chance to ask questions. May I remind everyone, both here in the room as well as online, that questions usually in most languages come with a question mark at the end. If you do ask a question, please state your name and position. That would be very, very kind. And also, please say whom you would like to address the question to. If that's not entirely clear, I will take the question, but you might not necessarily get the best answer. I suggest we make a first round of questions from inside the room and then see whether there are questions online. So if you are connected online, you are free and very welcome to put your questions into the chat. We're delighted to give you an answer. Is anyone brave enough to go first? Yes, let's just collect a little bit. Very good. I take the lady in the back, maybe?
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting conference. My name is Stella Veliki. I have studied physics and informatics. I'm a member of the European Physical Society. I have two very short questions. You want to increase the economic security of EU by producing more semiconductors and critical raw materials. My question is, do you take in consideration the production and the technology of qubits, Q-chips, they mean quantum chips, they are needed in the quantum technology that now it's developing. My second question is the defense industry. We are not directly in a war with Russia, but we need to have a very strong defense industry. Do you think to the possibility to put war economy temporarily and partially to produce a lot of arms for the war, to send it in Ukraine, for example? That was a question.
Thank you. Try to collect more questions in the room. There's a gentleman in the back. Yes, Clemens. Yeah.
Clemens Schuster, a startup entrepreneur, also on AI, and my question goes directly on that topic. So what about walking the talk when we have chances, especially, let's say, among the institutions? This house chose to go with a US solution to run all of the archives and stuff, not a European one. So in procurement, there is plenty of steering possibility, and I really urge to explicitly go Europe first.
Thank you. I take a third question here, the gentleman here in the front row. Yeah. Mike is coming, I think.
Well, thank you very much. It was really fascinating. And Kadri Tersan, I'm with the TOBB Brussels and GMF. I think another issue that wasn't mentioned is probably the political landscape that is changing in Europe that will affect all these policies, and especially given this political situation in France, Germany, and the election in Austria. I don't know, it's soon, I think. So my question would be general. I mean, how it can affect all these questions from your point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We do a first round of answers. Maybe my two experts on security defense first, and then AI.
So about quantum and economic security, we've had already the Commission looking at the critical sectors when they announced the economic security strategy. And to start with, they asked the member states to look at the risks in these critical sectors of economy, like AI, chips, biotechnology, and indeed the quantum computing. So this is, then there's a second exercise with 6 more sectors. But this is, to my knowledge, now over, and they are looking how to improve in these very sectors and how to address the risks, and then identifying in the further 6 critical sectors. So this is definitely something that is very high on priority, and it will be definitely in the new Commission as well. Thank you.
So I'll take the question on the defense industry. So I absolutely agree with you that we need to do everything we can to strengthen our defense industries, and the EU, as I've mentioned during my remarks before, is already doing a lot in that direction. And there's also a lot planned for the future that I've also mentioned. But in terms of the term war economy, that is not really an EU issue, that is something for the member states. So I can't really give you more on that.
Well, just to add on AI chips, well, I spoke broadly how EU companies are dependent on foreign technology, but AI chips is one of the examples in which we are dependent on other countries. So AI chips are designed and produced in non-European countries, and one of them is a big US company. And now, for instance, President Trump has threatened Europe to cut EU's access to these AI chips if the EU puts fines on big tech companies because of non-compliance to DSA. So this is something, really, that we need to tackle. And I do think, it is dangerous to depend on foreign countries on such critical technologies. So, let's see if the EU will do more on this.
Perhaps I take the third question on the political landscape, unless any one of my colleagues would like to come in. I would probably only say so much that, I mean, Jutta said at the beginning, this year is extremely important, and this time we actually mean it. Referencing the previous editions of the 10 issues to watch. And I think that's a very pertinent way of putting it. I think the year 2025 is absolutely crucial if you see what's going on in the EU member states, but also globally in our political systems, in our party political systems, in the stability of our of the EU's institutions, because of course that has repercussions to the EU level. So that would just be my very fundamental point. We will have to see how this plays out and what the effects are on EU policy making. But I think it becomes clear if you take a step back and sort of rethink the 10 issues that we just highlighted. And as I said at the beginning, there are more issues that one could include in that selection. We chose to pick up these two items, and they all come down to the fact that the EU requires a lot of political will to actually tackle them. And you would need to see not just a quantitative change, but a qualitative change of integration, as it were, in most of them, to really make a big jump ahead and to really tackle these issues head up. That's probably all I'd like to say on this. I think we have a lot of questions online. Could I ask Isabel to maybe read out some of the online questions?
Yes, sure. First question from Irene Faustinelli. While Maria Nistat was speaking of artificial intelligence, it seems to me that other world areas do not want to be regulated on AI and many other domains. What is Europe meant to do for this? Then a question by Alison Hunter, a question reinvestment, high level of skepticism regarding whether own resources can really shift the dial on investment needs. What about differentiated options, with member states opting to join forces in different constellations to improve financing capacity? Do we need a better debate on pros and cons of this? Another question by Irene Faustinelli, actually two questions by this person. A question reinvestment. Do cryptocurrencies and their development have impact on investment policies? And the next one, can't we have rules like in Australia to protect minors from social media? And one from Dan Giga, and that's the last one so far. The unitary functionality of EU has not been one of the themes in implementing the 10 directions presented. For the future, as an alive organism, any other forms for the best architecture for functionality is taken in consideration? Question mark. Up to you, Lasse.
Okay, a very diverse range of questions. So maybe just to recap and to make sure that I've and the colleague have understood this correctly. We have a first question of AI, which I think Maria will answer. We have a question on own resources, and whether own resources will be large enough, generate enough income for the EU, so to speak, to pay for all the expenses that that we'll probably have to see. A question about cryptocurrencies and social media. And I take the last one on, if I understand correctly, on the functioning of the EU. Maybe Maria on AI?
Yes. First, I don't quite agree that other countries are not regulating AI. The other countries are also working on regulation on AI. For instance, South Korea recently adopted a law on AI, and several Southern American countries are also working on AI regulation. I mean, in some countries, these laws are not so horizontal as in the EU, or they might focus more on also on investments parts. But we can't say that other countries are not doing anything on AI regulation. And besides that, there are also a lot of efforts being done at global level. So, for instance, the Council of Europe has adopted a convention on AI. So these initiatives, they give like broad principles that should be respected as regards AI. And maybe, well, I can take also the question on minors and the Australian law. So the Australia, they want to put like really strict rules on how minors can access social media. So that, for instance, before the age of 16, they shouldn't access at all social media, and companies could be fined if they still can access this. And yesterday I just went to a hearing that touched a bit this issue, and I mean, all of the participants in these hearings, they thought that Australia is not an example to follow. Why? Because it's very difficult to implement this. Children usually, they find ways to still go to social media. I mean, in EU, we also have rules on when when parents should give consent when children go on social media. And these rules are usually not respected. In reality, children go on social media much earlier.
I will maybe reply to the own resources question. Of course, the more we have with the Union its own resources, the more we have, the more we can do, the more we can invest. For example, the latest proposals for own resources would give additional 36 billion, which is, okay, still something. Beyond that, there are also other ideas like on borrowing. And we had, after the pandemic, the model of the Next Generation EU that was set up. And this is also another eventual way to provide to the EU more own resources to be able to go beyond and do more and meet more financing needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add on investment, the Draghi report gives the amounts that Marianne has mentioned, 800 billion euros additional investment. That's a lot of money. It's a mix of public and private financing, and it is focused on sectors where it is more effective and efficient to invest jointly at EU level. So there is a selection of sectors that, according to the report, should be really the focus of EU investment. So I think we need to see what we do best together and have a strategy accordingly. Thank you.
maybe I take very briefly, because it's a very long discussion, the question on the functioning of the EU, which I presume relates to treaty change, the unspoken word, because of course we haven't seen treaty change lately, but it's kind of the, you know, depending on your viewpoint, the monster of Loch Ness or the Holy Grail lurking in the background of most of these questions. Will we see it? I don't dare answering that question now. I think you will have to probably ask yourself whether we need treaty change to make sure that the EU functions. We have seen a lot of movement, mind you, in areas where previously, even just a few years ago, you wouldn't expect the EU to come together. I mean, Ukraine is just the best example, or COVID before that, where for years we said, or people said, or observers, you know, enlightened observers said, including myself, that it would never happen, but then it did happen, without treaty change, mind you. So is it necessary to change the institutional structure of the EU? I think it's an open question, but it's a very important question. I'm very glad it was posed here. Thank you. I think we have just briefly time for one or two more questions before we have to close the event. Maybe I move to this side, because this side already had a lot of questions. Maybe the gentleman here in the front and then the lady in the second row.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Leonardo Veneziani from CCIA, Sustainability Manager, trade association representing a broad range of ICT companies. My question was mainly for the two speakers on climate and AI, because my question is for you. What role do you think that technologies such as AI will actually have in helping deliver the green transition? Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Alessandra Chirico Consulting. I have a twofold question, and the one regards the importance of private-public partnership, which I think should be seen as a common thread, like a fil rouge connecting all these issues for them to function. And also I would like to refer to the metaphor with which we started, the orchestra. So the idea of working together in harmony, but I mean, in this case, I would like to ask all of you to have a little say on your topic to involve really all stakeholders. So not only, you know, the European institutions, but again, private sector and hopefully citizens. So in a sort of holistic view.
Two excellent questions. Thank you so much. Can I give maybe the first one on climate and technology and AI to maybe Lieselotte? Or Maria, if you'd like to come in, but maybe Lieselotte first.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I believe that looking forward, as I mentioned, the hardest part is still ahead of us. And I believe that it is very lucky that we also at the same time have seen the developments that we have seen in AI, because we have now more tools to actually ensure higher cost effectiveness of the measures that we take, because we can apply AI technologies in a broad range of sectors. And especially what I was mentioning about lowering energy prices, we have a lot of issues in the EU when it concerns the interconnectivity of our grids, where we're producing the energy, where we need the energy. And I believe that this is a key area where AI will be able to increase the efficiency of the overall operations. So for sure, I think that it is of key importance. So I will keep it short.
Well, just to, well, AI and I mean, how AI can be used to fight climate change, this is not really the area on which I have focused a lot, but what I can say is that often AI is also a problem for climate change. For instance, one of the things I mentioned were these EU supercomputers, the AI factories. So in these supercomputers, they use a lot of energy. And in that sense, the EU, well, this is something on which the EU is paying a lot of attention to, how to reduce the energy consumption of these supercomputers. So this is really something to keep in mind.
Yes, and on public-private partnerships, I think, as I referred also in the previous reply, at level of investment, we need both private and public investment, and of course, there should be an harmony, like in the orchestra evoked by Martin at the beginning. And I think that the recovery and resilience plans in that respect provide some interesting examples. In some member states, the plans have reform measures, for instance, in the sector of the green transition to facilitate permitting for renewables, and at the same time, of course, private companies are a key actor there. At the same time, skills are needed also on the side of the administration, and there are still hurdles, especially in small municipalities. For instance, environmental impact assessments may still represent a big obstacle. So, indeed, I agree we should have both the private and the public sector working together. Thank you.
Maybe one last word on my metaphor on the orchestra. Indeed, it's incredibly important for the orchestra also to feel feedback, maybe from the audience in this case, because it's the stakeholders providing the feedback. And in terms of economic policies, there actually is a mechanism called the European semester, but indeed it's true there can always be more interaction, more feedback from stakeholders, from NGOs, from different sides, and since we have now a new economic governance framework, this is actually at the moment playing out, and this is to be seen in how far stakeholders are involved in this.
Maybe just one quick sentence on the orchestra metaphor, which I really like, by the way. It's actually a very good metaphor that covers very well what the EU's approach to information manipulation and foreign interference is, because the EU has adopted a whole-of-society approach where EU institutions, of course, play a key role alongside private companies and media, journalists, fact-checkers, and civil society organizations, and education as well. So it's a very good example.
Thank you. I discovered that my colleagues are far more musical than I am. I'd like to thank all of you. We had, I think, some great questions. So a big thank you to the audience, both in the room as well as online. We have come to the end of our conversation here, to the end of our speed dating, but we will not close the event because I am very honored to announce that we have some closing remarks by Vice President Victor Negrescu, who took time out of his busy schedule to join us here. It's a great honor to have you. You may come up if you wish to the lectern to close the event. Vice President of the European Parliament, Victor Negrescu. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, of course, thank you for the invitation, and I would like to congratulate all our researchers for their very interesting presentations and, of course, the studies that they have conducted. I think it's important, of course, to show that behind the EPRS, there are people working with their teams, coming up with new ideas, spending time to assess and to evaluate topics that are key for policy making at European level. And I have to say that sometimes here in this House we tend to forget that, or to ignore the difficult work that you are doing. And of course, I'm starting already my third mandate here in this House. We like to read your studies, we get inspired by your studies, but we forget who wrote them. So I think it's good that you decided to again give more visibility to the work our researchers do, and of course also debate about it. And I'm really happy to see such much interaction and of course this interesting discussion at the end about the proposals made by our researchers today. Of course, we speak about 10 issues to watch in 2025. Of course, I hope that we can have an 11 or 12 issue as well. And I will, if politely, add another issue to the table of discussions, hoping for inputs from you and from the people attending here. But coming back to what you suggested in terms of recommendations, indeed, of course, we live difficult times, challenging times that require more than ever to come up with immediate answers that can be applied at a fast pace. Because today, in a world where social media, of course, clearly dominates everything, people are not able anymore to wait. They want the answers immediately. Of course, we all know as policymakers that strong and good decisions need time. You need to assess them, you need to evaluate them, to test their impact. But in the same time, there is this pressure, which is natural, coming from citizens wanting their lives to be better, wanting for things to be corrected faster, wanting immediate responses to the challenges that they are also facing, sometimes at individual level. So, of course, your recommendations underline the need, first of all, of further investment. The need to have a stronger capacity at European level to invest in facing those different challenges. You spoke about the 800 billion euros. Of course, we have, in this regard, several reports done also by the Commission. But, of course, it's also complicated to see where the money comes from. Having been the European Parliament negotiator for the 2025 budget, I can tell you that it is not easy to find the money. This year we have a record budget at EU level for 2025, close to 200 billion euros. So we have 200 billion euros for everything now at European level, and we need an extra of 800 billion euros, which again sounds really complicated. In the same time, of course, where will the money come from and how we are going to spend? This is again another issue. Recently, the Secretary General of NATO, coming and discussing with parliamentarians, said that we should reduce the budgets for health and for pensions and to increase the budget for defense. And I don't think this is the right way to go. I don't think we have to put domains against each other, but to see how those different investments can correlate, and together, by investing effectively, we can really have the impact that we want across sectors. Because, of course, we need to have a strong defense, we need to face those respective challenges, but we also should not ignore people. And, of course, if I might add an 11th issue to the things that you have assessed, is people and people's well-being. I think this is crucial, because it's complicated to speak about artificial intelligence, to speak about the green transition, to speak about the need to invest in SMEs, or even to speak about defense without convincing people to support those different processes. I think today, and I come from Romania, where we just faced some difficult challenges. Probably you know about the presidential elections. So therefore, I can tell you that indeed, people want us to talk to them, to explain to them what needs to be done. But in the same time, I think, of course, there is a growing need for well-being and for people to feel comfortable and to believe that they can fulfill their expectations and their objectives for the future. And of course, in this regard, I think we need to improve the way we communicate, the way we do policy making, but also the way we listen. We listen to stakeholders, we listen to the civil society, we listen to social partners, but also listen to people as a whole. And in this regard, of course, there is a growing need for more democracy, not less democracy. And in this regard, we have to identify, based on the expertise that can be provided also by researchers, to see how we can better do that. In the same time, looking at your assessment, I noticed that, of course, we always underline the fact that Europe seems to be incapable of fully facing those different challenges. I looked a little bit at the numbers. We can compare, for instance, the amount that Europe has invested in AI to what the US has invested in AI. Of course, in the last 10 years, the US has invested around 300 billion euros. We invested around 10 billion euros in transforming our industries for them to include this type of technology. And of course, this is a huge gap, which will have an impact on the long term. In the same time, of course, we want to be pioneers when it comes to green transition, but we also see the challenges that it faces and, of course, how we can make this transition fair. We can also look, for instance, at social media, and we see which are the players, and none of them being actually European, but at the same time, we see the impact that this has on our democracies, on the public rhetoric, but also we see that despite the fact that we depend on social media, people don't trust that social media can actually protect them, or that social media cannot be used to influence them. We look at our defense industry and we notice that some US companies are bigger than the entire European industrial capacity in the field, and again, this worries us. Nevertheless, as a conclusion, your study, your ideas also underline the fact that Europe has potential. And I would like, of course, in my last word, to refer to this potential and to call upon you, people attending the conference, but also the ones that might listen to us, to trust more Europe. I think we have, or many decision makers, many people have lost faith in Europe, in our capacity to be a global player, in our capacities to do more things together, in our capacity to be more effective, in our capacity to deliver on our objective, in our capacity, of course, to remain a leader. But I believe, of course, this shouldn't be the case, because the potential is there. We have the human resources able to do that. We have the market, if we look from that liberal perspective at Europe. We have the experience, we have the expertise, we have the industry, but mainly, and this is the most important thing, we have the democracies that we need to defend, that can be at the core of us remaining a leader at global level. So indeed, let's explore the 10 issues to watch recommended by our researchers today. Let's see what we can do to tackle them. But in the same time, let's find ways forward, trusting our potential and involving people when delivering upon the solutions that will surely help Europe remain a leader and finish 2025 on a more positive note. Thank you so much.
Thank you also from my side. This is just to say that we have copies of the publication at the end, which you may take with you. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you so much for listening. For those of you who joined us online, see you next year with the next edition of 11 Things to Watch, as the Vice President said.